freedom. For these reasons, I'm pleased to award you the highest civilian honor the United States can bestow, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Ask the military to come forward. I'm asking to read the citation.
President Biden nearing the end of his remarks there, speaking at a gathering of world leaders, NATO marking the 75th anniversary of an alliance that the president says is more powerful than ever. He talked about the enduring strength of the NATO alliance, but it was clearly a message being sent to Russia and Vladimir Putin about NATO's resolve to continue to support and help defend Ukraine. Let's go to our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. Hallie, as we watch this, it's hard not to think that there are a couple of audiences that were important from the White House perspective, certainly a domestic audience, and, as we mentioned, Russia.
You said ahead as you described the message to Russia that President Biden very clearly wanted to send with that announcement, of course, of additional help to Ukraine and those air defense systems, making very clear to Moscow, to Vladimir Putin, that NATO stands with Ukraine and will continue to do so. But there's another audience for this. There's a message also to those in the room, to the world leaders that have assembled here, that President Biden is trying to send that he is strong enough and vigorous enough to take on this job for another 4 years. And then, of course, the message to viewers, to Americans, to voters of the case that he has been trying to make since the 12 days since that debate performance widely panned as disastrous, that was an aberration, not the norm, and that he, in fact, can be energetic and vigorous and is up to the task of what he's got to do. All of that said, Lester, there is still, I think, on Capitol Hill, a sort of grim resignation here that President Biden is going to stay in the race, that people in some corners suggest they need to get behind him, even as you've seen about a half dozen now lawmakers come out and publicly call on the president to withdraw from the ticket. We know that late today there are some political prognosticators that have suggested that in at least 3 swing states, President Biden is now slightly less likely to be victorious, that former President Trump could, in fact, do better. And some battleground polling that is just out in the last couple of days shows that President Biden continues to very narrowly trail former President Trump in 5 of the 7 of them, although inside the margin of error. So, listen, important moment here for President Biden, but there are more to come, and people will be watching. Lester, big spotlight here for him.
And watching the president concluding his remarks, awarding the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Secretary General of NATO Stoltenberg. And now the speech is over as that meeting continues. Let's bring back our senior White House correspondent, Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, what were your thoughts as you watch, and what are we hearing from the White House?
Well, certainly the awarding of the Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor, is a grand gesture that is meant to carry a message, especially to those in Congress who have not been as supportive of Ukraine, and a show of respect from this president for the long service of the Secretary General, difficult service. And so that was something that the White House had not told us about in advance, and it is a sign of sort of the importance of being the host nation of this. The president was able to work through his speech in a strong voice, declaring the key principles of his views on NATO as this conference gets underway. There will be other tests through the days ahead. As you pointed out on Thursday, it's expected that there will be a press conference. And what we do know from our planning is that will expect to have more than the typical number of questions we normally see. Very often, this president does a news conference with another world leader standing next to him. And there are 2 questions from the American press and 2 from the world leaders delegation. We are told that the president will take more questions than that Thursday, and that will be something watched very closely. Lester?
All right, Kelly, thank you very much. That concludes this NBC News special report. We'll have much more ahead in our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and a full wrap-up tonight on Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day, everyone, and thank you for watching.
The NBC4 News at 3 starts now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Annabelle Sedano. We just heard from President Joe Biden giving remarks at a 75th anniversary event for NATO in Washington. His remarks come after many have been raising questions about his health. NBC4's Conan Nolan is here. Conan, how did the president do, in your opinion?
He had a teleprompter and a prepared text. He did quite